The ninth season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.
Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Hello and welcome to this week's Consider This. I'm Andrea McMaster. We're glad that you could be with us today. An epidemic stormed into Nebraska and Iowa just a few years ago. The summer of 2003 will be remembered for the influx of the West Nile virus. Doctors, scientists, and patients have learned a lot since then, but still some nagging questions remain. Why do some people become severely ill with the virus when others don't even know they've been infected? And for those who become severely ill, will there ever be a treatment for those people? Today, we'll find some answers to those questions on Consider This. We're joined by two doctors from the Nebraska Medical Center. I'm going to first introduce Dr. Allison Freifeld, an infectious disease physician at the Nebraska Medical Center, and Dr. Mark Rupp, an infectious disease specialist at the Nebraska Medical Center and professor at UNMC. So glad that both of you could be with us today.
Thanks. Delighted to be here.
Thanks for having us. Well, first off, I want to give some detailed information before we get into some of your individual studies that you're working at the Nebraska Medical Center. Just some background information of where we're at today with the West Nile virus. So far this year, the West Nile virus has been detected in birds, animals, or mosquitoes in 32 states. 15 people have tested positive for the virus so far this year. 3 of those people reside in the state of Nebraska, 1 in Douglas County. And in the year 2005, there were 3,000 human cases and 119 deaths, 5 of those deaths here in Nebraska. Now, 2003 had the greatest still the number of reported cases, more than 9,800 cases reported in 45 states with 264 deaths. Why was 2003 such a bad year?
Well, nobody really understands these issues with West Nile virus and why one year it's worse than another. Clearly, one of the things that your viewers should understand is those cases are just the tip of the iceberg, that so many people have West Nile virus and have mild disease or subclinical disease, and undoubtedly there have been hundreds of thousands of people in the United States infected with West Nile virus.
Was there something unique about the year 2003 that maybe we began to see more cases here in the state of Nebraska?
I think one reason to consider is historical. This is a virus that has been circulating and endemic in North Africa, Europe, parts of Asia for many years. It was first identified in Uganda in 1937 and really did not make an entry into North America until 1999, when there was a very circumscribed, limited outbreak in the New York City area. That was the first identification of West Nile virus in the United States. With subsequent summers, there was kind of a march westward from the East Coast with infection, waves of infection of human populations. And 2002 was the first time West Nile virus was detected in Nebraska, but in 2003 it really blossomed and became a major problem. We think perhaps because there was such a large population of people who'd never been exposed to this virus before, and a large population of birds and mosquitoes that had not seen it before.
How did the virus eventually make it to the United States?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's probably brought over perhaps with a person or a mosquito that hitches a ride on one of the airplanes that come from the old world. But nobody really understands that. In fact, that first year when it came out, people thought it might actually be an episode of bioterrorism. One of the interesting things in 2003 was that even though that was a year that we had one of the worst droughts in Nebraska, we had this mosquito-borne illness running rampant.
And we're dealing with a severe drought again this year. Does that mean that we could see a lot of cases of the West Nile virus?
Well, again, that's something that people really don't understand. One of the hypotheses is that in the agricultural irrigated fields where water collects for a short period of time, the mosquitoes have just a wonderful breeding ground without any natural predators. So rather than being in a natural pond or something where the fish will feed on the larvae, out there in the fields and the furrows between the rows of crops, they may not have that sort of environment, and the mosquitoes can thrive quite nicely.
And the reasoning behind why we see a majority of the cases in western central Nebraska than eastern Nebraska?
Possible explanation, yes.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about how the West Nile virus is transmitted to humans. It begins with mosquitoes. How does it get to us?
Well, that's right, and it's interesting that only the female mosquitoes are the ones that bite. Basically, this is a virus that circulates in bird populations, as many people realize, particularly in jays and crows, but certainly many species of birds have this virus and frequently don't become ill with it. In turn, mosquitoes feed on those birds and other mammals that have viremia, that is virus in the blood, and subsequently the same mosquitoes who carry the virus in their salivary glands will bite a human. And in the process of extracting blood from a human being can also inject the virus into the bloodstream of that person. So that's essentially the life cycle. Humans don't carry this virus for any prolonged period of time. In fact, it's really a very short duration of a few days during which the virus circulates in the human bloodstream. So it's really not possible for humans to transmit it to other humans directly.
Okay, what about the possibility if birds, horses, other animals become infected with the virus? Could they give it to us as humans?
Again, not directly. This is a virus that is transmitted through mosquito exposure, bites from a mosquito. There are several rare reports of unusual modes of transmission through blood transfusions. There's one case of maternal to fetal transmission. Organ donors, solid organ donors, have been known to transmit this virus. But again, I want to emphasize that these are very rare cases and not the usual method of transmission. It really is through the bite of a mosquito.
Okay. Is the West Nile virus, though, something that the average American should be concerned about being infected with?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even though the people who tend to get the most severe disease are those who are elderly or immunosuppressed, truly anybody could have severe disease. And as I mentioned earlier, it has been very common in the United States. And even the clinical illness without the neuroinvasive disease can be fairly debilitating. And sometimes those symptoms can last for weeks. So it can ruin your whole summer.
So when we talk about taking precautions when you're heading out into the woods or heading outdoors, for instance, just using mosquito repellent, that's a precaution that is necessary to take.
Yeah, there's some very easy, common sense things that people can do to protect themselves and limit the possibility that they can get West Nile virus. As you mentioned, trying to avoid mosquitoes, using some repellent, using some loose-fitting, cool clothing, particularly in the evening hours if you're out when the mosquitoes are feeding, making sure the screens on your home are in good repair so the mosquitoes can't come in. Just a few simple things like that. Patrolling your backyard and making sure you change the water in your bird baths or empty out those flower pots that have a little bit of water where the mosquitoes can breed. All of those things can limit the chance that you're going to be exposed to mosquitoes and hence West Nile virus.
Because we want to mention that July, August, September, those are the peak months. We might not think that because we think the beginning of summer for us began in May, but we're still going to see more of the mosquito-borne virus possibly.
I think that's exactly right. We've seen most of the cases in even late August and early September. But I think it's also important to emphasize that while Americans need to be very concerned about this virus, there's also a point to be made that 80% of Americans who have the virus, who are exposed to it and have the infection, have no symptoms whatsoever. They'll be fine. About 20% develop flu-like illness with fevers, muscle aches, maybe a headache and a rash that lasts for several days. This usually occurs between 2 to 6 days after the bite of a mosquito. It's really less than 1% of people who end up with the most severe forms of West Nile virus infection, and those are the meningitis and encephalitis, the neurologic complications that are so fearsome, really, and concerning. But really, just about 1 in 150 people who are bitten and infected with the virus will ultimately develop those sorts of symptoms.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about those, the 80% that might get some of the flu-like symptoms. Do you think a majority of those people ever know that they even have the West Nile virus, or do they just think it was the flu?
Well, it's the 80% that actually don't have any clinical symptoms.
Oh, they don't have any
So
symptoms.
None.
for 100 people that get infected with West Nile virus, 80% will be totally asymptomatic, not know that they've had the illness, and really the only ability that we can detect that is through some blood tests. They won't have any clinical manifestations at all. And then as Dr. Freifeld mentioned, there's about 15 or 20% of people will have kind of a mild flu-like illness, but can actually last for several weeks and debilitate people. And then it's just that 1 in 150, 1 in 200 people that develop what we call the neuroinvasive disease that are so concerning to us.
Do a majority of people get tested for the West Nile virus, though, that have those flu-like symptoms? Like, I mean, how do we know the number of cases? There's maybe far more out there because people might not be going to the doctor if it's just a flu-like symptom to even be tested for it.
I mean, that's why I mentioned early in the program that there's undoubtedly hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of people that have been infected with West Nile virus in the United States and were unaware of it, totally asymptomatic, and now are probably immune to the disease either for the rest of their life or for a very long period of time. The rest of the people who have a mild flu-like illness, most of those folks don't present to their doctors, and again, it goes away after several days or a week or two, and they just kind of suffer through it.
Okay. Well, I know this is some of the focus of your study, why some become more severely ill than others and don't even know that they've been infected with the virus. So a 3-year study funded by the National Institute of Health is what you're working on, right, Dr. Rupp? Looking at why some become severely ill and others only show flu-like symptoms, if even that. So why is there a difference? Why are those, that 1% that do become severely ill?
Well, Andy, you're exactly right, and that's really one of the mysteries of West Nile virus that we're trying to unlock right now. Clearly, we know some risk factors that would predict for those people who are more likely to get neuroinvasive disease. So as we've already mentioned, people who are elderly, we classify that as older than 50 years old now, and as I approach that, it doesn't seem quite so old
It's hard
anymore.
to say elderly with that, yeah.
Most of the people who've actually had death from West Nile virus are significantly older than that, and so people who are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s tend to have the worst sort of syndrome. Also, immunosuppressed patients will have a more severe type of illness. But we do see people who are totally healthy, young folks who can get neuroinvasive disease, the encephalitis and the meningitis, the inflammation of their brain and their spinal cord, and we really don't understand why somebody who's totally healthy, young, without any underlying diseases can get this sort of a neuroinvasive disease. We think it's probably or might possibly be due to some subtle differences in the way their immunologic system interacts with the virus. And so that's what our study is really trying to get after, is trying to figure out what are the differences between these populations of people who have had the virus and had either asymptomatic disease or very mild disease, and those that go on to get that more severe neuroinvasive syndrome. It's a very simple study. We're looking for some blood tests that can be done and to unlock these mysteries.
Okay. So for those that can participate in your study, talk a little bit about who you're looking for as candidates for the study.
Well, we're looking for very broad participation. Essentially, anybody who has had West Nile virus can participate in our study. And we're dividing it up into 2 populations and then comparing those populations. So we want to have a population of people who have had West Nile virus with very mild or asymptomatic disease, and we call that our control population. And then we want the case population to be those people with neuroinvasive disease. So it's a simple study. We take a tube of blood from those people, and then we do some very sophisticated testing on those blood samples to find out whether there's some very small differences in the genetic makeup of these people that would predict for those differences in the clinical outcome.
Okay, they don't have to have West Nile virus now. They could have had the virus within the past several years.
Correct. Anytime since it came here to the United States up into the present, those folks would be eligible for participation.
Okay. In talking to you before, if researchers find a link between the severe illness and gene-based immune response, how could that help maybe find some treatments?
Yeah, we hope that a number of things could stem from this study. We may be able to understand a little bit more about the pathogenesis of the disease, which would then hopefully lead to newer modalities for treatment. We also might be able to develop a test that could predict for West Nile virus infection. So if you were one of those people that was concerned about it, you could have this test potentially, and you might be one of the folks who would want to be the first in line to get the vaccine. Or you might be a person who would then take extra precautions to avoid mosquito exposure. So I think that there's a number of spin-offs from this study that could be very helpful to us as a population.
Okay, just a little bit of some about the basics of the study. When did the study get started? When do you hope to have it complete? completed, and who's working on the study?
Well, it's a multi-center trial. It's being centered at a university in Canada where they've also seen West Nile virus throughout Canada here in the United States. And then there are a number of sites here in the United States that are participating. Pennsylvania, here in Nebraska, and in Texas. So we're really trying to get a broad catchment of people. The study started here in Nebraska about a year ago, and we're hoping to complete it here within about the next 2 years or so.
And has there been any headway in the different locations where the study's being done that you've seen some differences, or you maybe been able to say maybe this is why that some become severely ill and others aren't infected? Or is it too soon to say anything?
It's way too early to give those sorts of preliminary data, and it's really only after we get all of the samples together at one place and do the testing in a central location that we'll be able to start to make some of those statements. So those studies are yet pending. Perhaps I can come back on your program in another year or so and give you an update on that.
Well, we'd love to hear it, because I'm sure a lot of people wonder,
Yeah.
why me? Why was it worse for me?
Yep.
For an individual who maybe had an organ transplant or someone who had been sick, maybe that's more likely for them to understand, but
Sure.
others who were perfectly healthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is a mystery.
And we've had a very good response thus far from the population of Nebraska. We've had about 300 people who've given us a call and volunteered to participate in the study.
Okay.
We're looking for about 800.
Okay, so lots more, and we'll give the numbers later on in the show about how you could become involved in that study if you've had the West Nile virus in the past. But first off, I want to move on to Dr. Allison Freifeld and talk a little bit about your study in relation but different as well, because you're working more with those that are severely ill with the virus. So first, I just want to give a little bit of your background. Infectious disease physician at Nebraska Medical Center, and you specialize in treating infections in patients who have received organ transplants or who have cancer.
That's correct, Andrea.
Okay. Right now, we have no treatment to the West Nile virus. And do you think that there's going to be one in the future?
You're right. There is no proven treatment to affect the course of this disease in its most severe forms. I do think that we're going to have something available in the future. I'm hoping that it will be something like the product that we're testing now. There have been a few other antivirals that have been looked at, including ribavirin and interferon. They haven't really proven to be effective in animal models or even in some human models of similar virus infections. And so what we've really started to look at is a naturally occurring product, antibody, also known as intravenous immunoglobulin. This is a naturally occurring antibody specific for West Nile virus. Interestingly, as I mentioned before, West Nile virus has been endemic, meaning circulating in the population in the Middle East for at least 50 years. And so an Israeli company that produces immunoglobulin from blood donors has produced this product and actually tested it in a number of Israeli people who had severe West Nile virus with very promising looking results. And so the National Institutes of Health here in the United States has taken this concept and partnered with that Israeli company to make this product available in a clinical trial. And by that, I mean that we at the University of Nebraska, along with about 30 other centers across the United States and Canada, will have the opportunity, actually have had the opportunity for the last 2.5 years to study this product and see if it will ameliorate or lessen the impact of severe West Nile virus disease in people who are affected.
Okay, the name of that product, Ombragam?
Ombragam.
Okay.
That's the name.
It's a very weird spelling. In fact, we do have that we can put at the bottom of the screen
Yes.
so people can see what it looks like. And we don't often see spellings like that, but it makes sense. It's coming from the Middle East, the name of the product.
Well, actually, it makes sense from a medical standpoint. I think Dr. Rupp would understand this as well. He's kind of smiling, but the middle of the name is IgG. That's the medical shorthand for immunoglobulin, which in turn is a synonym for antibody. So IgG is kind of a universal term for antibodies. GAM, that portion of the name is found in, again, the medical term gamma globulin, which is yet another synonym for antibody found normally in human plasma. So it actually does make sense medically.
Okay, well, let's talk about who you're looking for to be a part of your study.
Sure.
You've had some that have received this Omrogram so far as part of your study, but tell us a little bit about who you're looking for and how the study's working.
We're looking for people who really are at the other end of the spectrum than those being sought by Dr. Rupp's study, in that these are people who are acutely ill with the most severe forms of West Nile virus. They would be people who were fine up until a few days before presenting to their doctor and have developed the fevers, the altered mental status, headaches, neck stiffness, those sorts of more severe symptoms, and are thought to have some kind of viral illness. They don't have to have documented West Nile virus by the time they're referred to us. We want to get this antibody treatment administered to people as soon as we can. So we're looking for anybody who's ill with the sudden onset of these symptoms, meningitis, encephalitis, even extremity weakness, thought to be related to a viral illness.
So you know that you'll get most of your patients as referrals from other physicians in the state.
Yes, we're very dependent on that, and we urge physicians who have such patients to give us a call. It does require transferring the patient to our facility. They do have to be hospitalized for a period of at least 5 days to receive this Omrogram product.
Okay. We'll talk a little bit about those that are in your study are not all receiving the Omrogram. Some are receiving, 20% will be receiving a placebo and 20% will receive another treatment. Explain why you do that in a study.
This is a really important part of how medical research is conducted. If we were to give this product to everybody that presented with West Nile virus disease, we'd really never know whether it was effective or not effective. So this is standardly how we test new drugs. It's called a double-blind randomized study, and by this it means that I have no idea which product is being administered. Of course, our pharmacy does know. And at the end of the study, when all of the data is unblinded, we'll then be able to make those comparisons. Who got the Omrogram, and in this study about 60% of those who enroll in the study will get Omrogram, versus those who get American immunoglobulin preparations versus those who get saltwater saline preparations. But it's really important for people to understand that this is the only way and the standard way in which we can determine whether something will be effective or not effective.
But you would think that someone who is sick with the West Nile virus wouldn't hesitate to be a part of this study.
We would hope so. It really is the only study available through the NIH and in a broad way to examine this problem. And we feel that we can't say right now that it's going to be effective, and that's why the study's being done. So we, again, would urge people with these symptoms, with West Nile, to participate in this study.
Well, there is a couple who's consented that we can share a little bit about their story. The couple from Crofton, Nebraska, or a man from Crofton, Nebraska, I should say, that received something in your study, whether it was actually the Omrogram or not. But he wasn't doing very well, but now he's seeing improvements. So something's working.
Yes, and again, I can't say that he received Omrogram versus a placebo, but I'm very happy to report that he's doing much better. He was quite ill when he came to the Nebraska Medical Center, transferred from a hospital in South Dakota, and he received one of the products on our study, and over a period of months, he really made great strides and great improvements. He was a kidney transplant patient as well, and so really at the highest risk for severe disease.
Already susceptible then to infections. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about then when your study, you hope to have that finished, and the conclusions. Is it a couple years still down the road?
Well, probably with regards to finishing the study and then analyzing the data, which takes some time. The study, as I mentioned, is taking place across the United States at a variety of medical centers. It's due to close at the end of 2006. And so really this is our last opportunity this summer to enroll patients, and we're quite anxious to have patients participate because we're really only about halfway through our enrollment. We've enrolled about 50 patients across the United States, and we need to enroll 100.
Okay.
So again, we're anxious to get people to come forward or
be
their
referred by their
physicians.
physician.
to
Okay, well then
refer
I'm going to
them.
make sure to give that number so health professionals who think that their patients would be a good candidate for Dr. Feifeld's study should call the Nebraska Medical Center, and that number 402-559-8650. And for enrollment in Dr. Rupp's study, this is for adults diagnosed with West Nile virus anytime within the past 4 years, call the Nebraska Medical Center at 552-2254. Or toll free, that number is 1-800-763-6858. 1-800-763-6858. Before we end the show today, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, we're talking about mosquitoes passing on this West Nile virus to us. But in the past, in the world, mosquitoes really have concluded to passing lots of different diseases to people, and been related to deaths in the state with diseases, or in the world.
Oh, sure.
Well, mosquitoes are probably one of the most dangerous creatures there are on the face of the earth. Transmitting malaria in many parts of the world, and malaria used to be endemic in the United States up until 100 years ago. Dengue fever, various types of other encephalitis. So there's many diseases that can be spread by mosquitoes. And one of the very interesting things that we're learning with the West Nile virus studies, for instance, is how the environment and these vector pools, the mosquitoes, interact with one another. And there's actually some very careful thought being done with regard to global warming and how that might impact the reservoir of the vectors, and how that might influence human health.
Since we don't talk about malaria a lot in the United States, or some of the other diseases that you mentioned, we don't really think about that, but it's still prominent in some parts of the world.
Well, there's really no reason why some of these diseases couldn't make a resurgence in the United States, much like West Nile virus coming to the United States. If you have the right environment and the right vectors, it's possible that you could see things like yellow fever or malaria or dengue introduced back into the U.S.
Okay, well, Dr. Freifeld, Dr. Rupp, thank you for your insight on the West Nile virus this week on Consider
Thank
This.
you.
We really appreciate you and thank you for joining us for this week's Consider This. We're glad that you could be with us. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 9th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.